See everyone, well, most of the people here on the call. That would be great. Um, I understand there's quite a mixed audience. That's fantastic. It's investors, it's companies. There's quite a few names that I know, and I'm very, very pleased to see students here as well that run the social venture fund. That's really cool.
Absolutely.
So yeah, start with your questions, Graham.
Yeah, no, maybe feel Irene. Actually, I, as many of you know, I was an investor in this same program last year, and we had Irene then, and it was a great chat. So I'll try to replicate some of those, lead you into some of those wisdom pearls that you gave us last time. But maybe Irene, you could just start us off with telling us a bit about your journey of how you got here today. I know that journey is a long one from the Netherlands through Asia and Hong Kong and here to Canada, but it'd be great to have a little bit of context so people know you and where you've come from.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. I'll keep it brief. It's like I was born and raised in the Netherlands, went to university there, then moved to the UK, went to the London School of Economics, and then I moved to Asia because I thought the world was big and there's so much to experience. So Asia it was. I worked there for a Dutch pharmaceutical company, did the sales and marketing for Asia, moved to Jakarta, Indonesia, set up a sales office there, went back to Hong Kong and started to work as I was asked to join the Dutch Chamber of Commerce, which was really big at that time and still is, to help Dutch companies move into China. So I did that. And then we decided that we were in dire need of space and fresh air, and looked at the map and went like, oh, it's either New Zealand or Canada. And Canada it was. So we arrived here. And actually, just a couple of days ago, I realized I have lived longer now in Canada than I have lived in the Netherlands. So that's quite a huge thing. So here we are. We came here and started working with early stage companies like in mining, but also in high tech. And really, I'm really talking like 22 years ago. So the whole ecosystem was very, very different from what it's now. It was more, I would say, cowboy-like, if you will. So we started working with companies, and then we got involved in companies, and then we put money in companies. And that's basically how this sort of evolved. And then 3 years ago, we learned that Angel Forum, that has been around for a long time, I think since 97 or 99, the person who started that wanted to retire and was looking for a party to take it over. So I stepped in because I figured there's so much that I could still do with Angel Forum and just help things grow here and help entrepreneurs. And that's what I did. Then and maybe I might jump ahead a little bit, but I just want to talk to the Women Equity Lab part as well. I noticed that in Angel Forum, there's like 90% of the members, it's a membership organization are men, and I was told that that was the case, but I never really imagined that it actually would be the truth. And it was, and I just really noticed that there's not only a few women, but it was also harder to recruit women. And a very good friend of mine, Stephanie Andrew from Victoria, who's involved with the Angel organization there, had started the Women Equity Lab. And what it is, it's just a group of 25 women that put money together, not a whole lot, just an amount, but just to take them through the whole process of investing, from deal selection to due diligence to follow up to making investment decision. And there's 3 chapters now in Victoria. We have one here in Vancouver. We will start a new one. We just started in Okanagan. We're talking to people in Toronto. So that's going very well. And it seems that the sort of the whole concept really works because women get involved and then they sort of are over the thresholds and then they get involved more. And that's what we wanted to accomplish.
Amazing. And as you said, working with taking over Angel Forum and launching the Women's Equity Lab, you have your own, I think, management consultancy group or consultancy. How have you seen the sector or the ecosystem change over the last 5 years? We have a lot of new investors on the call today that are sort of scratching the surface of this and trying to understand where we've come from, where we are today. How would you characterize the ecosystem and how it's moving ahead?
Yeah, I even would like to take it a bit further. Can I say like 10 years from now compared to now? Because it's a complete changed ecosystem, which I think is fantastic. I mean, and not only this has changed, the world has changed, and as it should. So I think prior to, I would say like 5 years ago, it was mainly people who had made their money in mainly mining, I would say, who were brave enough to start investing in high-tech companies. And that sort of started the whole ecosystem here in Vancouver. And that really started about 20 years ago, I think. What happened then is that all people, so more and more people got involved, and it was very much network based. Like, I know you, you know me, and I know so and so, and that's how people invested. There are very many new investors right now. It was very localized, I would say, and I would say the whole ecosystem was very siloed. And now I've seen that there's way much more collaboration. There's new investors entering the space. There's new kind of companies. So it's all very, very exciting. And what I've seen really over the last half year is I've never seen that before. There's so much money in the market, and it doesn't mean that it all flows into the right direction, but there's a lot of money. But it also leads to things that I think can be very unhealthy further down the line. But things have changed, they have matured. I think the silos are slowly being broken down, which I think is fantastic. It's way more about collaboration. It's way more about getting other people involved in the space, and that's super, super important.
I'd love to ask you more about those maybe unhealthy parts, but maybe before I do that, one theme of this particular group has been about local investing, place-based investing, something I know you're passionate about. I've seen your work in the Okanagan. I think you met Rose in Nanaimo years ago. Where do you think that's heading? So the concept of place-based investing, and why is that important?
I think as a starter, that's why I'm here. I think it's super important. There's a lot of stuff happening in BC that can leave really smaller communities out of the equation, and that's not a good thing. And I think by being there, and even like I would say angel investing here in Vancouver is very local, and that's because angel investors, and I just talked to the angel investor part, right? There's many other sides to this as well, but from an angel investor perspective, you want to have a personal relationship with the person you invest in, and I think that makes it still very much local, and I think that's crucial for not only communities but just people in general. We like to be with other people, so even although I've seen more cross provincial investment, I think it's still, in general, it is a very local thing. And I think that's a very good thing.
Absolutely. Would love to open up questions to the group now.
Yeah. And I love talking to people, so please unmute and ask your questions.
Maybe I'll ask Kim to come off mute and ask your question or make your comment.
Did you say Kim, Graham?
Said Kim, okay. Yeah.
Is he nodding? Thanks, Irene. And I guess I'm just to build on what you just talked about, of the importance of place-based investing, and I think it's sort of been a theme, and it came up last week too. And it does become quite a challenge when you're trying to invest in a place to connect your capital and meet an entrepreneur or an enterprise or corporation where they're at. And I'm wondering if you can talk more about creating pathways for that to happen. And I guess I'm also curious about the role philanthropy can play in creating some of those pathways and enabling more capital into community-based enterprise.
Yeah, I just really want to make the distinction very clear, and I do a bit of both, but there is a distinction in between investing in companies, like in startup companies and early stage companies, generally speaking. And I think that has changed over the last 5 years as well. Very much 5 years, and before it was very much about we only look at companies that can have a 10 times return, like in 5 years. You need to have traction, and there were all these sort of set rules, and that has sort of changed a little bit, I think, in favor of more, how should I say, more personal belief investments. And I really think that initiatives like this can make the difference. And that's also why I met Rose like many years ago, when I just talked to people in Dynamo, and we just did a workshop there on angel investing. And it was just to see like what's going on, what can we do, where can we help. And creating pathways is by doing things like this and really meet people. So I already feel way more comfortable if I give you a call tomorrow, Kim, because now I've met you like this, right? And that's the difference. And we've seen that happen with angel investors on the island. We do a lot of investments now in syndication. That means that you do it as a group. And that can only happen when you've built a relationship with people. So by doing these kind of things, I think you will have a huge impact.
Other questions?
I'm just scrolling through the chat. Okay, Hillary has a very interesting question. That's where I see money go. And I think literally, I think money will go everywhere, and that's a very positive thing. I think there will be way more money going to sort of personal belief investments, but I also think there will be money going across provincial borders, but also internationally. And I even see that like how we are approached for deal flow. It's literally from everywhere. And also now with just the, I mean, it hasn't been for the last year, but the flow of people, right? I have lived here for 22 years, but I still have a network in Asia and one in Europe. And I know Keith is very active as well, like on an international level. And I see connections being made, and connections lead to money flow.
One thing we heard about in last week's session was, coming back to place-based investment, of how a lot of companies in smaller areas or secondary cities or towns have, in our case, impact and robust businesses in those areas, but may struggle to be the ventures that give you that sort of 10x play, classic play that or more traditional angels and VC are looking for. So keeping that in mind, and sort of thinking about Kim's question too about how to activate those communities, what do you see the role of angels in those smaller communities playing?
I think it's really important, and I think it's also it's way too much like it's black or white in a sense. Like angels are only invested in this, or angels are only invested in that. And I've noticed that change too. Like it's way more a sort of gray area. People that I thought would never invest in an impact deal did. And more than I ever could imagine. One of the companies that we had at Angel Forum. So I see things change. And I think by just having this exchange, like I have, for instance, you at Angel Forum, you have me here. And it's just by getting to know people, by getting to know companies, it will be less siloed, and money will flow way more freely. And that goes for sort of local businesses as well. And I just tell you, it is never underestimate the fact that people sometimes just do not know. We had no idea what was going on the island and in Victoria, but by just going there and talking to people, there's a very sort of lively ecosystem that we can work with. and collaborate with, but it's people do not know. So it's really important to go out and show people what's going on in Campbell River, what is going on in Squamish, what is going on in Pemberton, because people do not know.
Sahar?
Yeah, so hi Irene,
Hi.
I'm the CSO of Solar, and I'm very happy to have you here. As a female founder, I think that you're doing a great, basically what you're doing in Women Equity Lab is very much needed. And actually, I have a question regarding Women Equity Lab and comparing it to other kind of angel investment groups that are mainly male oriented. So I was wondering, like, what is different, or what differences do you created in Women Equity Lab in terms of looking at different startup companies and evaluating them and like investing in them compared to other, let's say, angel investor groups that are not mainly for female founders?
Okay, like I think also there things are changing rapidly, and that's the best news we can have. It's not black and white as it used to be, because the general thought is like, okay, female funders have a harder time finding funding. Like, yes, that is true, but also because, and this is a general statement, some female funders have a different kind of company, right? But we have found the big difference, what I have found with the women in Women's Equity Lab, is that by just doing things as a group, all together, just going through the whole process together, women are way smarter than men are. I can tell you that. Like, I have people that gave webinars, and actually one of them is my husband, and he turned around and he said, like, the questions I get from women are way better than I get from men. So it's like, yeah, I know, I told you, right? You should know. You have 2 daughters and a wife, but hey, so I think by just doing things first in a group and together, I think you lower the threshold for women to participate. I have seen a lot of women from being okay in sort of an angel form environment now, and they really hold their ground. So it's just I think a different start to get going. The difference is another thing that I've noticed. Doesn't just invest in female founders. It invests in sort of, doesn't matter who, as long as the business is something that speaks to us. And we, in hindsight, I think basically it's 50-50. So it's a better ratio than with sort of the general angel investor population. But the more women that can get involved, the better.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Irene.
Thank you.
Hillary, did you want to ask your question?
Hillary has quite a few questions, I see. Okay.
Amy,
one was on, go ahead.
Amy has built on it, so I'm actually going to pass it back to Amy to clarify.
And the bus goes over my back.
Yeah, I was right in your face. There you go, yeah. Amy.
Well, and actually it's interesting because a lot of us that are participating, like Laura and myself and Kyle, all very well-meaning and probably slightly smaller potatoes folks, have a similar question about, I get the concept of, the angel investor in the company and that, but roll it back a step. And how does that start? Or how does someone who's not an accredited investor play a role in this? And is this syndicate thing, or what's the, how can someone in our positions participate in a deal flow like that?
Yeah, very good question, and one that's very close to my heart, because my take on this is, if people are allowed to invest in very high risk companies that are listed on the TSX Venture Exchange, they should be able to get involved in angel investing as well. Because very often, and I see that in my group, angel investors are more than money providers. They assist, they have knowledge that they can help the founder with. So I think we have to deal with sort of the legal or the rules and regulations that are now there, and it's very strict on what makes an accredited investor, unfortunately. There are ways around that, and that's by structuring things in such a way that people that are not an official accredited investor can participate. But for Angel Forum and for Women's Equity Lab, they still have to sign off that they are an accredited investor, unfortunately. So we're now looking at ways, because we want to involve the younger generation as well. They are very smart, way smarter technology-wise than we are, so we would need them. So we're looking at ways to sort of get them involved without them having to be accredited investors. I think the way you can support companies now is by get involved. And that is how we got involved as well, by just helping out, because there's a lot of people with very good experience, and early stage companies don't always have, don't have the money to hire people. So if you could help out just in a practical way, that's a good way to start.
Thanks for that question. And next week, we're going to be talking about some of those potential structures, Amy, so something we're going to get into.
Yeah, and there's another thing what I want to say. We are working with NACO, which is the National Organization for Angel Investors, and although half of the membership are accelerators as well, to see if we can change or play with the rules as they are now, that when people do a certain educational part and they pass that they can actually get around the rule of being an official accredited investor and can invest up to a certain amount. And I think that's a very good way. If that would play out the way we hope it will, that's a very good way to get involved with a smaller amount.
Irene, to maybe play on and build on some of the comments that you've made, do you feel that building relationships like this and sort of getting a group of people together, presents ways of a broader range of people participating in investments simply by virtue of the fact that those relationships and connections have been built? Because it seems to me that some of the legal documents do have provisions for sort of a depth of experience and knowledge with the company. So I mean, to your point earlier, I think one of the most exciting things, and I just echo what you were saying before, is that by coming out and doing these things together, we're actually getting to know each other and building relationships, and hopefully in the next round we do this, and as we get more and more smaller local companies out, and we find other vehicles even of investing. You know, if a couple of us can pool some money and do a small loan, I mean, that might be very, very meaningful. At our scale here to support a coffee shop or so I get really goosebumps and excited thinking about
there's so many building. There is so many opportunities, and you should never, but that's a general life attitude of mine, you should never take the status quo for granted. It's like, it's there to change, right? So we look at ways how we can, and so many people are in favor of doing things, you know, instead of abiding by these are accredited investors and can only do this. A lot of interesting things are happening, and I think there will be a huge change with all the stuff that people are working on. And there is an, and I read the other day and I thought that was very exciting. There's a new dating app out and the name is Snack, and you might have heard of that. It's run by Kim Kaplan. She I think was heavily involved in Plenty of Fish, and she has a very good market approach, because she's like, well, listen, my clients are people of a certain generation, and it's a dating app more based on sort of a TikTok thing than the swiping. And I don't know much about dating apps, so I'm just copying what I read. So it's based on sort of more a TikTok video kind of thing. But she felt like, okay, the people that I want to have involved in here also as investors are a certain generation that do not qualify for sort of the accredited investor sign off. So she basically build a structure for those people to be involved as an investor for a minimum amount of $1,000. And it's legal, it's completely fine, there's a maximum. And I think that's brilliant and how things should be done.
Damien, I think you're up next.
Great, I think thanks. Keith is, yeah. Okay, Damien.
Hi, Irene. I'm really what you were saying about this sort of the evolution of the Vancouver investment market from when you started like 22 years ago. I think you're saying, you know, very traditional mining and resource oriented, and that has changed over time. I'm wondering kind of like where are we at here in terms of how mature is the tech market in Vancouver for investment? Where is it going in the next 10 years? Where does it sit, you know, in the context of like the global kind of investment market for tech compared to Silicon Valley or other countries, India, et cetera, and where are we headed?
Okay, first off, I have a same painting as you have from the same painter in my house. It's awesome. So I like you already. There we go. From a perspective, I think Vancouver is globally is a little town for what happens. I mean, if you see what happens there's Israel is just way ahead of sort of angel investment and companies. There's Europe is doing quite well, and Keith can probably speak more to this than I can. Toronto, but Vancouver will get there. I mean, I would say it's still a little, you know, it's a teenager and a very excited teenager in a very exciting world. So things are happening. But what is happening now, and that is super exciting, is that we see now for the first time, we see actually founders having made a whole lot of money reinvesting back in tech companies here. And that didn't, I think, happen before to the extent that it happens now. And that is very, very exciting. So now you don't have the old generation miners that invest in tech or in early stage companies, but you have people that actually really know tech, invest in tech companies. And I think that's combined with the fact that silos are coming down and people collaborate way more than they used to. I think that's super exciting, and that will have a huge effect on things here. And Vancouver will grow because it has a very good reputation. The reputation is getting out there. I think Vancouver 5 years from now will be very different. I will probably tell you it's almost adult. Yeah.
Just a quick follow-up on that. Can you see like a Vancouver-based tech company attracting investment from cross-border, international?
Yeah. This is super exciting and scary at the same time. There is like a lot of money is coming in from Silicon Valley, from fund managers all over Canada, all over the world. And it's almost like we had one particular company we were talking to for investment, and suddenly, and I compared it to this, like we had worked with this company for a while, we were committed, and then the very cool guy in the very expensive car drove by, threw money at them, and they were like, oh, I love you, and just ran after, you know, those particular people that were throwing money at them. I don't think can be very good, but you also want to have people that have your back. So yes, I do see a lot of money from across the border coming in, but also a lot of local money that wasn't there before. So it's interesting times.
Yeah, I'm gonna just quickly tap in on that. At Spring, one of the programs we run is called a funding roundtable, and about 80% of the companies that have been through funding roundtable have raised cross-border. So cross-border being a combination of interprovincial as well as global. See lots of money coming from like Seattle, New York, Silicon Valley. What's been interesting is that in Vancouver, you see a fair, reasonable representation of some people out of LA, in part because of the gaming sector and some digital media stuff. More and more Beijing, Shanghai, London, Singapore. So money in capital is flowing. And I think what is exhilarating is that it's happening. What sometimes is a little unsettling is the fact that it's very hard to do due diligence on some of those investors as well, right? And when you're selling a piece of your company, you know, if you're going to do reference checks on potential employees, please do reference checks on your investors. And so, but sometimes coming from a different part of the world, it can be a little bit more challenging to achieve. Doable, but just more challenging.
Yeah, and we've noticed that too, like a huge number of new funds becoming members of Angel Forum and becoming active here. You don't know where, you know, it's hard to do due diligence on those investors too. But yeah, it has changed completely, I would say, over the last year, right, Keith?
Yeah, I mean, it would not be unreasonable to say transformation, right? Like
exactly.
It's been incredible. And so I definitely like the share on that one. I do know that Kyle had a question. And Kyle, I don't want to lose sight of that. So Kyle, you can come off of mute if you want, but in chat, how does one become an angel investor, join your group, participate in deal flow? So there's like a process question. How does one get involved in something like Vancouver Angel Forum or Women's Equity Lab? And then in your experience, what level of capital is needed to fulfill a role as an angel investor? Which I know Hillary made a side comment in chat, but I'd love your comment there for Kyle as well.
Just from a very practical point of view, talking numbers, like for Women's Equity Lab, it's still the rule that you have to be accredited investor. We'll see what happens with that over the next year. And the amount of money required to participate in that is $5,000. For Angel Forum, you need to be an accredited investor as well. And I think we have an official rule that you make at least per investment $25,000, but that depends on the founder. We have found, because we do a lot of syndication, which is sort of work together as angels, they're quite happy to take less as well, as long as the total amount is what they are happy with.
Yeah, if you were to take a look at a raise on an equity crowdfunding platform like Front Funder, some of those campaigns actually do allow for investment to be as low as $250. Typically, it's about $1,000 and up. So it's a way not only for non-accrediteds to get involved in an equity crowdfunding campaign, but it is also a vehicle that accepts both non-accredited and accredited. Pros and cons to such platforms, and worth digging into if anybody's interested, but it does allow for a different minimum.
Yeah. The only thing what I want to say, the difference, the companies that we work with, and not all of the companies that present through Angel Forum, but quite a few are companies that investors from Angel Forum are closely working with as well. So that is also how we can help companies if they run into, we had that with COVID. When COVID hit, there were a few companies that purely because of COVID just hit hard times. And that allowed us to rally the troops, as you will, and put money up, and so that they could restructure and sort of continue the journey. And they're doing well. And I think that's a very important role that you can play as angel investor. And that's actually, for me personally, why I like to be an angel investor.
Kyle, did you want to follow up with anything?
Yeah, Graham. Sorry.
Well, I just wondered if Kyle wanted to follow up with anything.
Sure. Yeah. I just thank you,
Hi,
Irene,
Kyle.
for being here tonight and speaking to us. It's great to hear your perspective on things. Just as a follow-up, if someone was an accredited investor and wanting to participate in deal flow, what, in your experience or in your opinion, would be a percentage of net worth that you would want to put on the table to invest into companies?
I love this. Thank you for asking this question. I mean, angel investing is really hot and wonderful. It's all out there, people. Everyone is an angel investor, but please, it's very, very high risk. It's so just only put money in that you can afford to lose. And you can mitigate the risk by being involved in a company and do proper due diligence and talk about metrics that you will talk about later today, but really start by realizing it's very high risk. And just for instance, like not only companies fall by the wayside and you lose your money, but also money is tied up. It's not liquid. So it's not money that you can access like, oh, I need money tomorrow. You know, if you have shares, you can sell shares and you have cash. But angel investing is not like that. So it's illiquid, it's stuck there. And I have invested in a company, I think my longest investment now is 19 years. And I put it in there and it's still, and the company's around and it will be all fine, but it's 19 years. There's your answer. So only put in money that you do not need. And if you lose it, it doesn't mean the end of the life as you knew it.
Yeah, I'll give you a quick anecdote just to give you a sense. This is many years ago when I was running a tech company. I had somebody call me out of the blue and they said, hey, I hear you're raising a round. And I said, that's true. And they said, I would like to invest. And so I didn't know the person at all. I was like, how did you find out about us? And they're like, oh, my friend from university X is investing in your company. And I knew that person, of course. And I was like, oh, well, it's great to hear. Tell me about yourself. And the person's like, oh, I'm the assistant coach of the Ottawa Canadian Football League team. And I was like, well, the Canadian Football League is not exactly the most lucrative place to have a job. And I was like, how much money you make in a year? And the guy's like, oh, $65,000 a year. And I said, so how much you want to invest? And he's like, $75,000. And I was like, where are you going to get the money from? And he's like, oh, I'm going to pull it out of my retirement fund. I was like, no, you're not, and we actually had this exact discussion of like, you really want to go in saying, we're not going in to give it away, but it's high risk. And so we want to step in informed and empowered to do that. And make sure that, there's kind of a thoughtful conversation about what risk and reward looks like to the entrepreneur as well, right? Not only is it risky, but like, when are they thinking about getting out? And therefore, when would they like to get the money back to you? Are they thinking sell it in 3 years? Are they thinking keep it forever? Like something in between? Like, it's good to know at least which way their compass is pointing, right?
Yeah, let me jump in for a second if I can. Kyle's an accountant and he likes numbers. And, as an angel investor myself, Kyle, I budget about only 5 to 7% of my net worth in startup companies. Irene is precisely right. It is money that is going to be tied up. It is high risk. It is not for the faint of heart. You need to be looking at a 3 to 10 year horizon. And you certainly don't want to put a whole lot of your net worth into it. It's high risk, but it's also high reward. And the other thing she said that I would emphasize is that you should be prepared to get involved. Money is the least valuable thing I bring to the 8 or 10 companies in Vancouver and Victoria that I'm invested in. It's about experience. It's about knowing how to run a company. It's about being able to help a CEO form a board or manage their supply chain or negotiate with tier 1 OEMs. That's what angels do. That's actually the most gratifying part of it. And I'm sure Irene would echo that.
Yeah, wholeheartedly it is. And it's also, you also bring your network. So if there is trouble, you know where to find a person who can help or find the persons who can assist in putting more money up. It was something I was gonna say, but it just, if there's another question, it might come back. Okay, in the chat room, we're still talking about the exemptions. It's good that you talk about that, but just keep in mind, please, it's high risk. But also, and then going back to what Keith said, like, just have that discussion at the beginning, like, what does the founder want with the company? We've had founders that were more mature and they started a new venture and basically said like, yes, I'm gonna mortgage the house and gonna put all my money in because this is what I'm gonna do. And it's like, you should not. And in the end, they didn't, fortunately. You just have to play it very, very, very carefully. So I have the discussion with the founder. Is it a business, or is it really an early stage venture that will grow 5-fold, 10-fold? So, and there's nothing wrong with having an early stage business and just have, you know, have a good life and enjoy working for that. But it's good to be very clear about what the end goal is.
Yep. Now, maybe a quick question on my end. Women's Equity Lab.
Yeah.
You know, we have seen a seismic shift in how people are viewing investing in women-led businesses and investment by female funders. What are some of the patterns that you're seeing around investing in women and or kind of the growth of female funders in the ecosystem?
I think for the female funders, I think people, it almost seems that they were waiting on the sideline to get involved, but just didn't know how to make the jump. And if you provide sort of the bridge for them to cross that sideline and join the group, they are dedicated, they are smart, they have a very, very business background, and they are very, very willing to get involved. For female founders, I say, like with all the applications I get for Angel Forum, female founders are the most organized, the most to the point. They know what they're talking about, and I think they make that extra step, and that's just in general, they make that extra step to present well, and they usually do present very, very well. And I think we were just all sort of waiting for things to happen and see what they could pull off. And Women's Equity Lab doesn't invest in female founders because we have to. It is because they have a very good business proposition.
You'll be happy to hear, Irene, that the 5 core companies here are all women-led. So
I happen to know that, and I think that's fantastic. Yeah, no, it's great.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I'm encouraged about is that there also has often been discourse and conversation about how a traditional pitch has not necessarily worked, not necessarily been ideal for female founders because of the way that they do talk about the business and the way they present it. And so for me, I'm thrilled by the finalists that are here because I think it shows that there is an opportunity when you create the right space and the right format that you can get real engagement. So any tips for the teams here? We have 5 finalists. Please, sorry.
This is very close to my heart. I was like, get out there. Don't stick with what you know. Just go out there. Come to Angel Forum. Pitch to the 80 mil that we have in the audience. We have your back. I mean, we really want you to do that. I still see way too much here and way too many companies sticking to the tried and true, right? Or whatever. Like I've been here, I feel comfortable here, but just push yourself a little bit. And we had a company participate in the Battle of the Pitch Decks, and she said, like, this is amazing. I never knew I could do this. Well, of course you can. So I really dare all of you female founders to come out and go to the sort of the more established, maybe male-dominated. I have worked in mining and I still do work in mining on the side, and that's male dominated, but you can only change things if you just push yourself a little bit. And there is a receptive audience now. And it doesn't mean it's always like successful when you start, but things are changing as they should.
Yeah. Well, and if I'm not mistaken, Irene, Women's Equity Lab started in Victoria. They have a chapter there. They have a chapter in Vancouver, right? Expanding. So
they really are. Yeah, they really are expanding, and I think it's they have 3 chapters in Victoria now. Working on the 3rd. Sorry, the first 2 are fully invested. Vancouver will start a 2nd one over the summer, and in the Okanagan it's up and running. And we're talking to parties in Manitoba and in Toronto right now.
Yeah, fantastic.
And these female funders also can help you going to these sort of more established traditional forums like Angel Forum and help you out there, because I've seen members, like 1 week I only had like new female members, which is fantastic. So I really welcome the change. And Hillary, yes, the earlier you see capital that you need, the better. Build that relationship, talk to people. If you want to hang out at a community meetup that we have just to see how things go, please let me know and I'll invite you.
Irene, thanks very much. This is probably a good point to stop. Some very motivating comments to end with. So thank you so much for your time. It was wonderful to hear from you, get your experience, your thoughts on the sector, as well as individual tips. So thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Good luck. And I keep a close eye. I think it's awesome what you're doing.
We're going to take a short break now, everybody, and we'll come back at 6.
That way.
So the storm has arrived, me.
Oh, you were listening in, huh?
That's what they call me, spring. Hi, Keith. If you,
I will reserve my comments.
Yeah. I try to make my audio better here, so you'll see I have a screen on one, a blank screen on the other. So sorry about that, but hopefully you're able to see the see my screen now. So we'll get started again. What we're going to do here is link last session on impact with the concept of measurement, both for impact, but also for the business as a whole. And we're going to spend 10 minutes, maybe 15 on this, and then use some of these observations and take those to breakout rooms with your due diligence groups to start chatting through this, getting to know each other, the investors that will be linked with the companies, and start to sort of work into some of these themes. The companies have their investment models there to present, or at least draft versions, and so we're the objective for this last hour is really starting to dig in and apply some of these things we've been hearing from our guest speakers and from our core content and from other learnings that you've seen on our online platform. So yeah, kicking this off, we talked last session about the impact model, how remember how that linked inputs all the way through the chain, all the way to the outputs, outcomes, and the impact that we're trying to create. And the ways we measure those things are critical to proving out those assumptions there. Now, the closer that those track to the actual business performance, the better. If we can simply assume that clients reached, for example, has a proven impact, well, that metric is just as good for your business metrics, it's the strength of the business and the profitability of the business, as it is for the impact that's being created. So that alignment is important, but it's also helpful because it simplifies things. So as just an overview here, so we talk about impact measurement, we're talking about how a company can focus, measure, and communicate that impact. Whereas impact is that problem statement that we've talked about and the change that the model is bringing it. And measurement is actually what and how this is measured. So some concepts and principles here is what we're trying to do when we speak about measurement is quantify the goal so that it can be objectively viewed. We're also trying to understand and communicate baseline. So what would have happened in the absence of the business or the intervention? And then finally, another concept that's talked about and important to assess is, or at least be aware of, is the additionality. And that's just a fancy sort of word to talk about what in the impact of the business actually create and what was responsible to other things happen. And so depending on the business, one or all of these may be more difficult to communicate than others. So, I'm still learning about our 5 finalists in a way as much as everybody is. But, Cassandra, with Hail Mary, you're quantifying the impact of how your business model is helping these trials. Is maybe sometimes a challenge to actually quantify. Like, how do you talk about how the trial will be better, or how will it contract the time which your business affords? But understanding what would have happened otherwise, the baseline and the additionality of what actually you're doing, may be easier. An MCOW, for example, you're quantifying that impact. If we're talking about the farmers in Cameroon, presumably you can show what the farmer would have made from sort of the spot price, for example, and what they're now making because of the company. So you have that baseline pretty easy to because you have a commodity price, you have what you are offering, and for the additionality piece, we know exactly how many farmers you've impacted. So perhaps that's easier to explain. A Solaire is just I won't go through all of them, but if the end impact for Solaires is to have more solar panels in the market, great. And the theory is by having better technology, better product, or perhaps cheaper prices, can do that. That's a solid impact model. Maybe harder to tease out exactly when we see more solar panels in the market. What was a result of Solaire's business model, and what was a result of other things going on in the market? So these are just sort of things to have thought through and sort of develop in your discussions with the entrepreneurs, digging into some of their assumptions around what they're planning to do with their businesses. So of course we measure these things because we think we know a lot of things as the entrepreneurs, as the investors. We also just think we know things, and so by measuring them through your business metrics and through other sort of third-party ways, we're constantly kind of testing, challenging ourselves, refining, and confirming those assumptions. So again, just like so much we've talked through, this is a live, living beast that we're talking about, which changes over time, and those very metrics that we're collecting inform our discussions. We thought it would be helpful to just briefly touch on a case. This is Nada. They're a package-free grocery store and delivery service. They are connecting people to their food with this sort of circular economy, where they're reducing waste. So they're bringing in, they're using their supply chain to have food services that don't have packaging, and that you need to either use the store's packaging or glass containers that can be reused afterwards, and you can also have it delivered. So they collect a bunch of different data, and they have all sorts of impact here. This is probably quite small on the slide, and we won't go through all of these, but you can get the sense of what they are capturing. And this is a company that's obviously very mature, and so their metrics sort of reflect that as their capacity to collect some of these things. So they have containers diverted, cups diverted, recovered food, and so they've thought about the baseline, what would have happened in the absence of their model, and then what is the actual additionality, or what has been diverted because of what they've sold. So behind all of these are a series of assumptions, and this is, as you see, aspirational, where they hope to get to between 2021 and 2027. But it helps to understand what they're tracking. Now you'll notice some of these are core to the business. So containers diverted implies is a proxy for how much they've sold, right? I mean, the amount of things that they've diverted is clearly how much they've sold and how much they perceive to have displaced. The first one, donations for 1% for the planet, is an impact. Of course it is in its own right. However, it's not a proxy necessarily for any of the core business metrics that might be happening. So not all impact sort of indicators are created equal in that sense. So if we map this to what we discussed last time, you see the familiar template here, and that's what the entrepreneurs have prepared or have been digging into over this last week. You see how for NADA it would be, they have a series of inputs, what you can imagine for many businesses, their employees, their product, the different stores they have, both online and brick and mortar. And then they've taken those and made activities such as their online sales and marketing, their actual brick and mortar operations, the whole supply chain engagement, which is quite complex on their side and sophisticated, and delivery logistics, which is being done in many cases by bicycle. And that creates a series of outputs. So of course, how many customers they had, what their sales turnover, what their profit margin has, CAC or customer acquisition costs, very standard important metric. What percent of goods sold are deliveries versus in store. And that leads us to the outcomes, the sort of short to midterm changes that they're hoping, that they're seeing here. And now we're getting more into the impact side. So where you saw the number of containers that were diverted, prevented food waste, what would be the greenhouse gas emission reduction because of the way that their supply chain works. And that, of course, links to those SDGs as the long-term impact. So what you see is both a mix of business metrics and impact metrics that come out of that. Now, the tricky part, of course, is to not get overwhelmed with so many metrics and to narrow that down to a reasonable number. So in this case, we've suggested that the entrepreneurs try to boil this down to between 2 and 5 indicators, and for each indicator, explain it. Explain it, first of all, what is the indicator? What is the current result? What is that number right now? And where's it going? And of course, how is it measured? In some cases, that'll come right out of the accounting system. And if it's sales or clients, in some cases, it may have to be measured periodically with a client survey, for example, or some other type of outreach. So I've put here some examples. What would be if we took an education platform, you can think of this as a tutor online platform or something that helps with test results, or there's a lot of models out there on this vein. And you could think of an indicator being simply the number of students served. Now, what would be key here is, in terms of the metric, make sure this would be unique users, right? So if you're looking at number logged on, you'd have to make sure that is you're only counting unique users if you're really trying to understand how many students have been served, to make sure you're not double counting. So that's where the how you measure it often is. There's a little sort of devil in the details there. Number 2 would be a little deeper, a number of students who have improved test results. That would be tricky to get right out of your business metrics, but it would be something that perhaps by survey you could capture. And once you know that, you can then extrapolate that over time. So if you know that, I think we put here 35% in having improved test results, then you're going to scale the company by 10 times. You would know exactly how many students, or at least estimate how many students you're actually improving their test results for. And then a third one here, more of a business metric, what is the actual fee generated per student? So whatever the companies are coming up with, indicators that work for them is the key takeaway here. Obviously, there are many metrics. At Spring, we have an entire, I think, 2-hour session on all the possible metrics that could be collected from companies, depending on the business models. You see some here, and what we say at the bottom here is, again, coming back to what are the most important ones that test the opportunity of the business, but also the impact. And again, to emphasize where those can be the same ones, makes it simpler and really sort of streamlines the story. And of course, the effort in recording those. I'll pause here for questions, and then, as I mentioned, what we're going to do next is jump into our breakout rooms with our groups. Let me pause here for a second, and I'll stop the share.
Sorry, Graham, I was in the chat and not paying attention to my mute button. One of the things I think that a lot of the startups struggle with is, impact is only relevant at scale, right? For the most part, if a company is starting out in the first year and their revenues are 6 figures, they're not really likely to have an impact on anybody. So the question that I would pose for you and Keith is, at what scale should these companies be considering the impact measurements at? Does that make sense?
Let me take a first crack at that, and then Keith, if you want to chime in. A useful way of thinking about impact is thinking that the breadth and the depth, one way, or breadth and impact. So when you say it's only relevant at scale, you're talking about what that aggregate is, because you've now scaled the business model so much so that it's touching this many lives or having this much total environmental impact. That's absolutely true. But what we can do at this stage is start to tease out what that depth is. So even in a startup case or an even prototype case, or even frankly from the business model, what do we hope to be doing more at a unit level? So we know that once we scale it, we can project that impact. So there is an element that should be teased out at this stage and comes from that theory or that impact model that's still relevant at the startup stage. And I'm taking your point fully that this shouldn't necessarily be onerous at this stage, but that sort of foundation can indeed be there. Keith, did you want to add to build on that?
Yeah, just quickly, because I know we want to get into the individual rooms and start talking to the companies. So to Graham's point on breadth and depth, breadth really is the domain of those scalable, like high scale entities that can create a certain amount of impact, but across multiple communities, countries, mass, number of consumers, etc. We don't want to lose sight of those who can create depth of impact. So for example, people who can, eradicate homelessness in a community, transform, equality in a specific community or in a specific country. I think when it comes to angel investing, sometimes it's hard for us to see deep local impact opportunities in angel investing, because quite often they end up being structured as say nonprofits or charities. So it's not that they're not possible, but I think to Dana's point, when you think about speaking into the world of for-profit early stage impact investing, then that notion of scale comes in. I 100% agree with Graham. A pragmatic approach is the right way to take it. You want to know what you want to measure and where you want to focus your impact. And the measurement processes should be very pragmatic according to the size and stage and resources available to the company. It can't be onerous on the entrepreneur or on the investor. It doesn't make any sense. I was actually speaking, and Hillary was leading a conversation with an investor yesterday where they said, like, in certain cases, they only do impact measurement once every 3 years, because that's actually a way to kind of like make it pragmatic. So just as a sample data point. And I do want to note that Damien does have a question. So maybe Damien, one last question before we go into breakout rooms.
Yeah, great. Thanks. I'm just curious about, aspirational projections when you're looking forward, especially when it's a relatively new company and they're looking forward 5 or 6 years? Any guidance on how to kind of come up with or make those projections in a way that isn't just total BS, and how an investor also is going to look at that, like that methodology, or how are you coming up with these 3-year pro formas or projections that you're looking for in a way that's really well grounded or has some sort of rationale to it?
So I'll quickly chime in, and this actually, Hillary, Graham, Dana, Dre, like all of you can chime in. So just very quickly, anybody who's doing early stage company projections, to your point, they are conjecture, right? So we don't know, right? Because the company is early stage. The reason that we want to look at them is because it presents an opportunity for you as the founder with your team to show investors that you understand how your industry works, how the business model works, and what are the key levers that you can pull to make it go up or down, right? So I'll give you an example in your context. So you say, I am selling business to business, in effect, technically business to government if you're selling to schools, right? And then if you said to me, okay, Keith, I've built my financial projections where I say, I've done my homework. I know how many schools there are in North America. I understand that their average budget is kind of like this. So I think that my average kind of revenue per school is X. And therefore, if I want to get to 1 million, 5 million, 10 million revenue, this is how many units I need to sell. If I need to sell that many units, here's how I need to think about my cost and my distribution. So now I don't care what number you put in, like as in, is it 7.8 million in revenue in 2 years, or is it 2.3? I care less about that actual number. What I actually care about is, do you understand, like, how are you selling this into the market? How do you price the product accordingly? Are you selling to schools, or are you selling to districts? Like, is there like a bulk sale model here? Like, how do we do that? Is there any e-commerce involved? If so, what are the levers that I pull, right? So these are the key considerations. And I think it's really important for all of us as we go through this, because in this conversation, whether it's, MCOW or Heal Mary or Ava, like, and I'll use Ava and MCOW as an example, talk to us about, like, how much are you selling in e-commerce? Do you understand the levers that you pull? Do your financial projections show that? And then the last thing I would note is the number you put out there for 3 to 5 years first helps me to believe that all of the inputs show that you understand your industry and business model. Second, you are signaling to me your aspirations. I want to change the world, or I'm going to start small and I'm going to be cautious and I'm going to slowly evolve over time, right? And so sometimes setting that number out there will signal to me what your intentions are. And so I think, Dre, you had your hand raised first. Over to you.
Yeah, I was going to say, I really loved the way that you said that. And for me, the same also applies to any of these SDGs or any kind of impact that you're looking at having. I mean, you could look at a financial, you can look at the financial dimension of the company, but you could also say, okay, well, where am I at today in having impact on this particular SDG? What are the decisions that I'm making today, and why am I making them the way that I'm making them, so that I can get to somewhere I would like to get? I think that really speaks maybe to Dana's point as well, that especially impact where maybe sometimes it feels like it's a little bit harder to get as concrete and as deep with specific numbers. I think being able to tell a very coherent story about how you're gonna get to where you want to go on that impact is important. I like this idea of levers that you're using, Keith, and feel like it's equally applicable to any of those SDGs that companies might be looking at.
Let me say what Keith said a slightly different way. And one thing that he said I want to highlight is that the numbers are irrelevant. Right? All we know for sure about your 3-year pro forma is that the numbers will be wrong. What's important is the assumptions. And what an investor is looking at is the credibility and defensibility and the logic behind how you built out your assumptions. When I advise the companies that I'm mentoring on their pro formas, we spend an inordinate amount of time scrubbing the assumptions, testing them for validity, assessing them against third-party industry data. Because once you have the assumptions right, credible, defensible, the numbers just fall out of that. And then it's hard to argue as we poke and probe as investors in due diligence, we poke and probe at the assumptions. The numbers are the numbers. They fall right out of your assumptions. So spend the bulk of your time refining the assumptions that go into your 3-year pro forma. And those, frankly, should be in a separate tab, and not only a separate tab, but the first tab of your P&L, of your pro forma, because that's what investors are going to go to first.
Fantastic. I think we're off to breakout rooms, Grant.
We are. Amy had a great question in chat. Amy, did you want to voice over that? I'm happy to
paraphrase it. Yeah, just that we've been talking about, what the impact is, but in the lesson materials that's on the spring website, which are fabulous, by the way, thanks for putting all that together. It talks about also how a company does this. And I think there are two different things. And I'm just wondering about how that factors in tangibly to metrics or into evaluation. I use the example of the Paul, they could make, they source, sustainable local cashmere, but then they weave it with blind people, right? So they're how they do it has an impact as well as what they're doing, right? And so I'm just wondering with our companies that we're working with, if we're going to look at that sort of thing as well.
Absolutely, and that's such a great point to bring up. And we've mentioned, I think, in passing, the B Corp assessment, for example, as a way to kind of get under the hood and actually understand some of the how. I think a short answer to the question is making sure there's values alignment, right? Like what are the values of the company, and are they being directed not only at the outcomes of the company, what the company's doing for their clients, but what they're doing for their employees and their other stakeholders. So you can imagine a company that has an incredible effect on some sort of health service, but they treat their staff terribly. Everybody's underpaid, unhappy, and there's lots. And you could maybe tease that out in metrics of churn and other things, but sometimes it's hard to detect. So having that understanding of the values of the funders is where you start to see that. So definitely a huge part of it, and something to talk about with the companies.
Great, thanks.
With that, we will indeed move to breakouts. Let me just share screen so you can see where we're going.